After noon next day, I quietly climbed up the slope towards North High. As the altitude slowly rises, the white vapor coming out of my breath became more visible. As to why I was walking to school during winter vacation, it was because the SOS Brigade was holding its regular meeting today. Today was also the day on which we would do some spring cleaning of the clubroom. Asahina-san would occasionally sweep the floor, but as with the second law of thermodynamics, in which the total entropy of any isolated thermodynamic system tends to increase over time, this rule also applies to our clubroom. For example, if no one had offered to help clean a lazy person's room, the room could only get messier. It'll never be tidied up all on its own. All sorts of junk were gradually brought into the clubroom to create a kind of orderly chaos, and the culprit responsible for all this mess was none other than Haruhi, who would grab anything she fancies. Not to mention Koizumi bringing in one board game after another, Nagato bringing in more and more thick books and reading them at the speed of a flying arrow, as well as Asahina-san, every day trying to brew the perfect tea. In other words, everyone besides me was guilty. It'll become chaotic if we continue to leave it like this, so I suggested it's time to bring the stuff back to each of their homes, with the exception of Asahina-san's cosplay wardrobe staying at least. Man, what a pain. I just couldn't walk at a relaxed pace because of an extra piece of notepaper in my jacket pocket. That note contained a word-by-word dictation of Nakagawa's declaration of love for Nagato. It was so retarded that I had to restrain myself from throwing the pencil away many times when writing it down. The only person I could think of who would say such embarrassing stuff without any shame would be some professional conman. Besides that, I can't think of anyone else. Wait 10 years for me. Give me a break already. Walking into the mountain breeze, I arrived at the familiar school complex. I was still an hour early for the meeting. On the phone last night, Nakagawa said before going,
"Don't just copy it down and then give it to her. You'll just be a substitute author then. Who knows, maybe she wouldn't read it. You have to recite the whole thing to her in person, using the same passionate tone that I just used."
That was the most ridiculous request I've ever heard. I have no reason, nor am I so simple, to be jerked around by that idiot. Yet after sincerely pleading with me, coupled with the fact that I'm generally a nice person, I just couldn't find a way to refuse him. Therefore, I desperately need to find a situation where no one else was around besides Nagato. If I went an hour early, the other members wouldn't have arrived yet, except for the familiar, ever-reliable, and ever-present alien-created living humanoid interface, Yuki Nagato. After formally knocking the door and hearing a silent reply, I opened the door. Hi there! I wonder if I sounded too unnatural. My mind urged me to rephrase that sentence. Hey Nagato, I knew you'd be in here. Inside the clubroom, filled with the chill of winter, Nagato looked like a life-size doll which one would not detect any warmth from, sitting quietly on her seat, reading some thick hardback book about some sort of disease. The poker face looked at me without any expression. Looking as though she was going to touch her forehead, she lifted her arm, but then lowered it again. That movement looked as if she was about to push up her glasses, but Nagato doesn't wear glasses now. It was I who said she looked better without glasses, and it was she who decided to leave it like that. So what was the action for? Has the habit from 6 months ago come back? The others haven't arrived yet?
Not yet.
Nagato answered concisely and returned her gaze back to the page packed with so many words that there was almost no place between them. Was she the sort that would feel a sense of great loss if she wasn't doing anything? I walked stiffly towards the window and saw the central courtyard below, which was visible from there. As today was a holiday, the school was nearly empty. Some of the more cold-resistant members of the various sports clubs can be heard chanting from afar through the window glass. It was the usual Nagato, her skin white as ever and her face blank as ever. Nagato, there's something I need to say to you.
What is it?
Nagato flicked a page with her fingertips. I took a deep breath and said, "Some lame bozo says he fancies you. I've decided to help him all the way and help him declare his confession. Well, you want to hear?" According to my plan, the moment Nagato says no right there, I would proceed to tear up the paper to shreds, but Nagato just looked at me without saying anything. To me, her icy cold looking eyes suddenly looked as warm as if they had been melted into water. Was it because my opening line was so impressive? Nagato shut her lips tight and stared at me like a surgeon examining a patient.
Is that so?
She slowly uttered those 3 words above, while still looking at me without blinking. As she seems to be waiting for me to continue, I had no choice but to unfold the paper and begin to recite Nakagawa's confession. "O my great goddess Nagato, as your most faithful follower, I am distressed that I can only express my adoration of you this way. From the moment I laid my eyes on your holiness." Nagato kept looking at me while silently listening, yet I was the one who was feeling more and more uncomfortable. As I was reading Nakagawa's stupefying confession, the whole thing just felt more and more stupid. Nakagawa's story ended at the time when he has bought a huge house in the suburbs and is living an idyllic life with 2 kids and a white dog. As I was reading this diary of the future, I noticed Nagato was still staring silently at me. I suddenly had the feeling I was doing something extremely stupid. Why did I agree to do this? I stopped reciting. If I were to continue reading this piece of lunacy, even I'll go insane. It's unlikely I'll ever become close friends with Nakagawa, since I never hang out with someone who could come up with such cheesy lines. Forget it. Anyway, that's about the gist of it. I'm sure you more or less get it. Nagato simply said,
Understood.
She then nodded. She does? I looked at Nagato, and Nagato looked back at me. Time passes by quietly as though the words of silence grew wings and flew around us. Nagato slightly tilted her neck, but apart from that she didn't do anything else, but continued to stare at me. Now what? I should be talking, right? As I was running through my vocabulary on what to say,
I have received the message that you have relayed to me,
her gaze never moved away.
but I cannot comply with his request.
She said in her usual calm manner.
I cannot guarantee that my self-control mechanism can continue to remain stable for the next 10 years.
After finishing, she shut her lips tight again. She never once changed her expression or moved her eyes away from me. No. The first to budge was me. I pretended to shake my head just so I could look away from those dark eyes of hers which looked as though they were about to suck me in. You're right. 10 years is just too long. Though the confession's problem didn't just lie with a waiting time that was too long, I still breathed a sigh of relief. As to where this relief came from, to put it simply, I just didn't want to see Nagato getting close with Nakagawa or some jerk like him. I don't deny that I still have some impression of that other Nagato in my mind when Haruhi had disappeared. Nakagawa wasn't too bad. He can even be classified as a nice guy. But I just can't get rid of the image of that Nagato looking distressed as she softly pulled my sleeve. I'm sorry, Nagato. I crumbled the piece of paper into a lump. It's my fault. I shouldn't have dictated this thing word for word, and I should have turned down Nakagawa's request on the phone. Please forget what just happened. I'll have a word with that idiot. Don't worry though, I don't think he's the sort that would become a stalker. But if Asahina-san were to suddenly have a boyfriend, I'd probably stalk him all day. Huh, so that's how it is. Now I knew what this uncomfortable feeling in my heart was. Whether it was Asahina-san or Nagato, I just can't stand any guy getting between them and me. It was that simple. That was why I felt so relieved. I guess I'm an easy to understand guy. What about Haruhi, you say? If it's that girl, then I'm not worried at all. Haruhi would usually ignore any guy that dares to pursue her. Should the skies fall one day and Haruhi actually begins to go out with someone, then she wouldn't be busy looking for aliens or time travelers. That should be good news for the Earth. And I'm sure Koizumi would be delighted at the decrease in workload. After that, the turbulent and surreal part of my life would come to an end. Maybe that day would really arrive, but I wasn't sure it was now. I opened the clubroom window. I thrust my arm out and threw my lump of paper I had in my hand as far as I could. The lump of paper slowly floated along the wind and silently landed on the grassy knoll adjacent to the corridor linking the main school complex and the clubroom complex. I guess it'll soon be blown into a water duct by the complex building, and then decompose with the fallen leaves and return to nature. But I guessed wrong. Oh shit! There was a person walking on that very corridor that suddenly changed direction and headed for the grassy knoll. That girl turned and glared at me as though I've just thrown a cigarette butt, and proceeded to pick up the lump of paper I just threw. Hey! Don't pick that up! And don't read it either! Ignoring my futile protests, she picked up the garbage that no one asked her to. She then opened the crumpled paper and began to read it silently. Nagato continued to look at me. Let us take some time to consider the following questions. Question 1. What was written on that piece of paper? Answer. A confession of love for Nagato. Question 2. Whose handwriting was on that paper? Answer: my handwriting. Question 3. What would a stranger think if he had read this? Answer: he'll probably misunderstand. Question 4. Then, what would Haruhi be thinking if she read it? Answer: I don't even want to know. And so, Haruhi read the piece of paper thoroughly for some minutes, and then lifted her head up and looked sharply at me, while revealing an evil smile that looked sinister, seemingly up to something. As expected, today was definitely not a good day. 10 seconds later, she had already entered the clubroom in the most ferocious speed possible and was grabbing me by the collar.
Just what the hell were you thinking? Are you an idiot? I'm gonna have to throw you out of the window just to knock some sense into you!
She yelled while carrying a smile, only that her smile looked a bit stiff. If the strength that she used to drag me towards the window were converted into energy, it would be enough to supply a day's worth of indoor heating. Not even my frantic attempt at explaining could reduce the intensity of this strength. No, wait! I can explain! I was helping this old classmate of mine called Nakagawa.
What? Are you trying to shove this all to someone else? It's your handwriting, isn't it?
Haruhi said menacingly while she dragged me back. She then stared at me with her large bell-like eyes from a distance of just 10 centimeters. You've got to let me go first! I can't say anything properly if you pull me around like that! As I was tugging and pulling with Haruhi, a fourth person had arrived at the wrong moment. Asahina-san's eyes were as big as a tray as she stood outside the door. She elegantly covered her mouth and said,
Are you in the middle of something? I wonder if I should come back later.
Well, we were in the middle of something, but it was nothing serious. Besides, there's nothing fun about twisting and pulling with Haruhi. It would be a different story if it were Asahina-san, though. Anyway, please do come in. From the past to the present, I have never once denied Asahina-san the right to enter, nor do I intend to. Furthermore, Nagato's sitting here in the clubroom as though nothing's happened, so there's no reason why Asahina-san couldn't come in. If she could help me get out of this mess, she was all the more welcome. As I was smiling at Asahina-san while tussling with Haruhi at the same time.
Oh my.
The last member had arrived, sticking his head from behind Asahina-san.
I wonder if I've arrived too early.
The fellow revealed a cheerful smile and swept aside his hair parting.
Asahina-san, it would seem we have arrived at an unsuitable time. Perhaps we should return later until they settle this domestic affair. I'll pay for your coffee at the vending machine, of course.
Currently, Haruhi was clutching my shirt tightly with all the strength she could muster, while I grabbed on Haruhi's wrists. At this rate, I'm going to suffer from ligament pains. I quickly decided to call for reinforcements. Hey, Koizumi! Where do you think you're going? Come and help me!
Now whose side should I stand on?
Koizumi decided to play dumb, while Asahina-san stood stiffly and blinking non-stop like a terrified little rabbit. She didn't even notice Koizumi casually placing his hand on her shoulder as he attempted to play the knight in shining armor, saving the damsel in distress. I took a glance and noticed Nagato was doing what I thought she would do. She hardly looked concerned and continued to read her book. Oh, come on! It was all because of you that I'm now in such big trouble. Why can't you at least say something? And then, Haruhi's clutches became even tighter.
I must be blind as a bat! I can't believe I've actually recruited someone so dumb as to write such a stupid love letter into my brigade. Now that pisses me off. You're to resign immediately. Man, I feel so terrible. It's like sticking a bare foot into a shoe full of cockroaches.
Even though she was full of rage, Haruhi still managed to display an enigmatic-looking smile. It's as though she didn't know what expression to use in such a situation.
Before arriving here, I've already thought up of 13 different kinds of punishments. First, you are to leap up a wall with a dry salted fish in your mouth and fight for territory with other wild cats. And you have to wear cat ears while doing that.
If Asahina-san were the one doing that in her maid uniform, I'm pretty sure it would be a sight to behold. If I were to do it, the next thing you'd see was me being hurled off in an ambulance.
So we don't have cat ears.
I turned towards the window and sighed. I'm sorry, Nakagawa. If I don't bust you, I'll become the next object that gets thrown out of the window after that lump of paper. If possible, I didn't want to reveal anything about you, but if Haruhi's misunderstanding were to continue, even Mother Nature would be messed up. I took a look at the widely opened eyes of the Queen of the Brigade. Using the same comforting tone when trying to calm Shamisen down as I cut his claws, I said, Listen to me, Haruhi. You'll have to let me go first, Haruhi. I'll explain everything until even your dull wits finally get it. 10 minutes later, Haruhi sat on a steel chair with her legs crossed while sipping her green tea.
Your friend sure is weird. Although he's entitled to fall in love at first sight, this obsession is just pushing it too far. What a jerk!
Love not only makes a person blind, it causes brain damage as well, you know. Ah well, it's not like I disagree with her last statement anyway. Haruhi waved the piece of wrinkled up letter.
At first I had thought you teamed up with that idiot Taniguchi to make fun of Yuki. Since it sounds like the stuff that he'd do, not to mention Yuki's the quiet, obedient type of girl, she's bound to get fooled.
I don't think you'll be able to find anyone in this galaxy harder to fool than Nagato. But I didn't interrupt and listened quietly. Probably sensing me refraining from talking, Haruhi took a quick menacing glance at me before suddenly reverting to a relaxed expression.
Forget it, he wouldn't even dare do such a thing. He neither have the intelligence nor the cunning anyway.
I wasn't sure whether she was complimenting me or dissing me, but at least I wouldn't do something an illogical elementary school kid would do. And no matter how crap Taniguchi was at expressing himself, he wouldn't do something so childish either. The one who lit the fuse was the resident fairy and angel of the SOS Brigade.
I think it sounds romantic.
Asahina-san said indulgently.
If someone were to go crazy like that over me, I think I'd be happy. 10 years, huh? I'd certainly like to meet someone who was willing to wait 10 years for me. So romantic.
She clasped her fingers with her eyes glittered. I wasn't sure whether the romantic that Asahina-san spoke of was the same romantic that I think of. I just felt that they had differing definitions. Maybe the vocabulary has changed in the future. After all, she was the sort of person who didn't even understand how a boat could float on water until someone explained it to her. Nakagawa and romance are basically insulated from each other. I gulped the remaining cold tea in my teacup and continued. Even if he had been reincarnated in the wrong body, he's the sort of physical guy who's destined to never have a chance at becoming the male protagonist in a shoujo manga. His animal horoscope is represented by the black bear, the one with the crescent mark on his chest. As I said, I began to envision a figure that matches up with what he looked like in junior high. I really should apologize to him for describing him like that, and before I could destroy all evidence of Nakagawa's declaration of love, Haruhi had already read it out passionately to everyone. After hearing it, Koizumi's reaction was different from that of Asahina-san's.
Now that was a stunning speech.
He continued with his ever-pretentious smile.
The letter generally revealed to the reader a good impression about the author. While it was slightly over-idealistic, the fact that he was down-to-earth and grounded in reality was commendable enough. Though the author kind of lost himself as the result of a sudden frenzy, from his words one could see his passion and ambition. If this Nakagawa-san can really work as hard as he says he will, then he is sure to become a remarkable person in the future.
This psychoanalysis sounds like something from a small-practice clinical psychologist. Can you really comment on someone's life just like that? Koizumi threw another smile at me.
It requires a great deal of courage to use such language in a confession letter, and you reveal yourself to be a generally nice person by agreeing to dictate it. If I were you, my fingers would have been trembling too much to be able to write anything.
What's that supposed to mean? Are you giving me a thinly veiled criticism? I shrugged my shoulders and told Koizumi about what happened earlier. Nagato already gave me her reply long before you came. I spoke on behalf of Nagato, who was paying both Haruhi and Koizumi the same proportion of attention. She said 10 years was too long. Well, that's expected, so I think so as well. At that moment, Nagato, who had been silent so far, finally spoke.
Let me see.
She stretched out her tiny fingers. Now that surprises me. It seems to have surprised Haruhi as well.
I guess you're curious about it.
Haruhi said as though reading through the expression of the sole member of the literature club hidden under her bangs.
Though Kyon's only responsible for dictating this love letter, you can still take it home as a souvenir. After all, this letter is either very ambiguous or very honest, but it's rare to find this sort of confession in this day and age.
Here you go.
Koizumi received the wrinkled piece of paper from Haruhi and passed it over to Nagato. Nagato lowered her eyes and began reading my handwriting. At times her eyes seemed to be focused at the same place, as if trying to grasp the meaning of those lines of words.
I cannot wait.
Well, that's to be expected. But Nagato then added,
But I can see him.
a sentence which caused everyone in the room to fall silent. She then added another line which nearly made my jaw drop.
I am curious.
After finishing, she looked at me with her usual gaze. It was a gaze I knew, a very determined gaze, as clear as a flawless, handmade glass artifact. The spring cleaning ended not quite like a typical spring cleaning. When I suggested taking care of the books on the bookshelf, Nagato did not answer with a yes or no, but just stared silently at me. Seeing those eyes that barely hid a hard-to-describe sadness, I just couldn't bear taking the books down. The only board game from Koizumi's collection that ended up in the trash can was a paper-made backgammon board that came with a magazine and was only played once. Asahina-san's personal collection consisted only of her tea leaves anyway. On the other hand, for anything that Haruhi brought in, she responded with a resounding,
You can't throw that away! Now listen up, Kyon! It's a sin to throw away something without ever using it. I would never do such a thing. Things that can still be used ought to be reused again and again. As long as their quality lasts, I would never throw them away. That's the spirit of environmentalism.
Haruhi tied a triangular handkerchief to her head, handing Nagato and Asahina-san a mop and broomstick, and gave me and Koizumi a bucket and cloth and ordered us to clean the windows.
This will be our last time visiting this place this year, so we'll have to make this place sparkling clean before we can go home. Only then can we ensure that we can come back feeling at ease after the new year.
After receiving our orders, Koizumi and I began cleaning the windows. Time to time I took a look at the North High schoolgirl trio, wondering whether they were cleaning the room or just spreading dust around. My partner then spoke softly to me.
This is just between us. Besides the organization, there are various other organizations that have wanted to approach Nagato-san, because she is now just as important as Suzumiya-san and you. Among all the TFEI terminals, Nagato-san's existence is particularly unusual, especially recently.
I sat on the windowsill and breathed some warm, moist air onto my hands, trying to keep away the chilling wind which was lowering my body temperature with ease, while continuing to wipe the window with a wet cloth. What the hell are you talking about? It is actually quite easy to play dumb. Recently, however, I experienced something with Nagato and Asahina-san that had nothing to do with Koizumi and Haruhi, and the present me exists as a result. I could not sit idly by and play dumb with this current situation. I'll think of something, I continued, while looking relaxed on the outside. This incident was started by me, so I should take care of it myself. Koizumi wiped the inside of the window while smiling.
Indeed, I'm counting on you this time. Just trying to prepare for the SOS Brigade's end-of-year snow mountain field trip is enough to keep me busy. Besides, you could still mess around with Suzumiya-san to reduce stress. Unfortunately, I do not have such a luxury.
Then who's the tomcat? Yet, the beautiful smile on Koizumi's face became twisted.
Don't you think it's about time that I take off this harmless-looking mask and change this image that I don't even know when I created? It is, after all, very tiring trying to talk courteously to a classmate all the time.
If you feel so tired, then stop it already. I completely didn't feel like controlling his expression.
That won't do. My present image fits perfectly with how Suzumiya-san would imagine me to be. I'm quite an expert in understanding her mental conditions, after all.
Koizumi sighed in an exaggerated way.
On just this basis alone, I feel very envious of Asahina-san. She doesn't even need to pretend, she only needs to be herself.
Didn't you once say Asahina-san could be making up this appearance of hers as well?
Oh, did you actually believe what I said? If I can win your trust, then maybe my hard work will have produced some fruit after all.
Just as pretentious as ever. It's nearly a year already, and his flamboyant way of speech still hasn't changed a bit. Even Nagato's heart has gone through some changes, but you're still as fake as ever. Asahina-san doesn't need to change. It is best that she remains the same for now.
If I were to take on a different appearance,
Koizumi began to wipe faster.
then it would not be a good omen. Keeping the status quo is my duty. I'm sure you wouldn't want to see me look serious.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to. Since you're always grinning idiotically all the time, you're ideally suited to stick closely around Haruhi and help her clean up her mess or plan stuff for her. I'm really looking forward to the mystery play in the Snow Mountain this time. That's more than enough, right?
That has got to be the best compliment I've ever heard.
I didn't know whether he meant it or not, since anything that Koizumi said would end up as white as vapor on the glass.